This is Living Power with Dan Hurst.
Now, starting with verse 22, John jumps ahead to what is called the Feast of Dedication. What we've been studying over the past few chapters was something that happened around the Feast of Tabernacles, which was actually in our calendar, that would be around October. Now, a couple of months later, it's time for the Feast of the Dedication, which was in December. It was winter. It was cold. The Feast of Dedication today is called Hanukkah, or sometimes called the Festival of Lights, or Feast of Lights. And it commemorates the reconsecration of the temple by Judas Maccabeus in 165 BC. It was desecrated in 168 BC. The temple and the city were taken over by Antiochus Epiphanes, and he was the king of Syria. And he came in and just took over the place. And he, in the process of doing that, he killed 40,000 people, and then he sold 40,000 people into slavery. And then he went into the temple and he sacrificed a pig on the altar. Can you imagine how desecrating that was to the Jews who did not eat pork? He took a pig and he puts it on the altar, and there's really it's pretty disgusting, and there's really no real nice way to say it, but basically he took the broth of the pig and he splashed it all over the temple, completely desecrating the temple. 3 years later, Judas Maccabeus led an uprising, and they took the city back over and drove him out. And the temple then was purified with great pomp and great solemnity. And that Feast of Dedications celebrated that time when they were delivered from their enemies. So that's what Feast of Dedication is all about. Now it's called Hanukkah, or Feast of Lights. Festival of Lights. So anyway, this is what was happening. It was wintertime, and they were now at the time for the Feast of Dedication. And Jesus is walking along in Solomon's Colonnade. Now, Solomon's Colonnade was this long covered walkway. It was on the east side of the temple. It served a couple of purposes. In the summertime, in the heat, it provided shade, some relief, from the direct sunlight, and at least some coolness. In the wintertime, it would provide a covering from rain and maybe some of the winds. It was a large area. You can see a picture of it there on the screen, and that's actually a replica of it. But it's a very large area that where they would meet, and it was used as a center for teaching, mostly informal teaching and preaching, since there would almost always be somebody there at the temple for worship. And so Jesus is walking along down this Solomon's Colonnade, and several people gathered around him. And the implication, the way when you read the story, you begin to realize this didn't just happen, that there was something by design, that they just surrounded him and they started demanding to know, how long will you keep us in suspense? If you're the Christ, tell us plainly. It was like they had been discussing this, and they said, let's just corner him and get this over with. And so they surround him, and they just say, all right, tell us. If you're the Messiah, we want to know. Now, the challenge obviously reveals something about their impatience, because if he was the Messiah, they wanted him to fulfill his calling by achieving independence for the nation, overthrowing the powers that be, and establishing peace on earth. That's what they believed the Messiah was going to do, and he is going to do that. But that was not what Jesus' intent was for being there then. His intent for being there then was to provide the redemption of mankind. And so they wanted him to establish the kingdom. They said, look, if you're the Messiah and you're going to do this, then prove it. If you're the Messiah, we need to know this, and you need to establish yourself. And if you're not, then we need to keep looking. Now, it's obvious that they had not written him off completely. Even though they had said those things about him, it's pretty obvious that they had not completely written him off. I mean, after all, they couldn't deny all of the miraculous works and the amazing teaching that he gave them. On the other hand, he hadn't, as far as they were concerned, he hadn't formally presented himself as the Messiah. You know, he hadn't stood up and said, I am the Messiah. You know, everybody follow me. He hadn't done that. In fact, he hadn't even shown any political ambitions, and that's what they expected the Messiah to do. He was, after all, they believed the Messiah was going to overthrow the government. And so he hadn't given any indication that he was going to do that. He had no political ambitions, no political interests. And, you know, he didn't criticize the government. He criticized the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but he didn't criticize the government. That certainly didn't jive with what they thought the Messiah should do. In their opinion, they had this idea that the Messiah was going to come in, overthrow everything, establish his kingdom, and everything would be great. Jesus' response is rather convicting. He says in John 10, verse 25, Jesus answered them, I told you, and you don't believe. The works that I do in my Father's name bear witness about me. Come on, guys. What do you mean I haven't told you? I've told you and you won't believe. And in fact, he had told them so much about who he was. For example, back in John chapter 5, verses 36 through 4, there's about 4 verses there, and I'm just going to pick out a few of them, but look at this. Verse 36, the works that the Father has given me to accomplish, the very works that I am doing, bear witness about me that the Father has sent me. Then in verse 39, you search the Scriptures because you think that in them you have eternal life, and it is they, the Scriptures, that bear witness about me. What he was saying was, look guys, everything that Moses said, all of the words of Abraham, all of the teachings of Abraham, all of that, all of the Scriptures of Isaiah and Jeremiah, the Psalms, all of that, they all point to me. I'm the Messiah. I fulfill all of the prophecies. I am who I say I am. I am the Son of God, the Son of Man. I'm here. I am the Messiah, is really what he was saying. I'm all of those things that the Scriptures say I am. But verse 40 is so condemning. He says, yet you refuse to come to me that you may have life. Now, what does it take if you follow the Scriptures, the Talmud, and you follow the writings of what later would be known as the Old Testament, and all of the prophecies point to Jesus as being the fulfillment of being the Messiah? All of those things talk about him and what he would do and who he was and all the things that he is. They all point to him, and you don't believe. What was Jesus supposed to do? And not only that, but in John 8, verse 56, he was very clear when he said to them, before Abraham was, I am. And when he said I am, he was saying, I'm God. He had just told them a couple of months ago that he had authority over life and death. We just saw that just a few minutes ago. That was 2 months earlier. He had authority over life and death, and he would even raise himself from the dead. And they refused to believe. What was he supposed to do?
On behalf of Dan Hurst and the Open Class, we want to thank you for watching. We hope it was a blessing.